Hello! Today we're going to chat about how to take care of your rain garden. My name is Deanna and I work for Plaster Creek Stewards as the program coordinator. My work is designing, implementing, and working with community members with the rain gardens in this curb cut rain garden project. First, let's talk about what is the issues within our watershed. And firstly, what is a watershed? A watershed is an area of land that all drains to a common point. So if you can see in this photo, when it rains on a landscape, the water flows down to the lowest areas. Sometimes this is above ground through streams and rivers, and then it can also soak underground and flow into our waterways that way. Everybody lives in a watershed. No matter where you are, the land you're on drains somewhere. And watersheds integrate communities. Most urban watersheds are very degraded. Plaster Creek is no exception. The quality of a creek tells you a lot about the land surrounding it. So here we can see this area looks very natural. There's trees to absorb the rain and filter the water, as well as a natural landscape. When we think about urban waterways, this is oftentimes what it is. There's not a lot of natural area here to filter the water, to cool it down, to create a natural habitat. This map shows some of the larger watersheds in the lower 48 states of the United States. All these different individual watersheds are nested within each other. If we zoom in on Michigan, we can see this is the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes Basin, all of this land drains into the Great Lakes freshwater ecosystem, which has about 21% of the world's fresh water. If we zoom in even further, we can see this. This is a digital elevation image of the Grand River. So the warm colors, the red colors, are high elevation, and the blue colors are low elevation. The Grand River flows out to Lake Michigan. It flows just like this, out to Lake Michigan. Downtown Grand Rapids is about right here. And the Plaster Creek watershed is located just below downtown. This watershed flows north. So it starts out here and flows this way into the Grand River. Here's a map of the watershed showing the different land uses. So in the headwaters area, it's a lot of agricultural, so runoff from farm fields, drainage ditches, that sort of thing. And then it continues on through commercial areas. Think about, the East Beltline, 28th Street, that area, and then continues through suburban residential and then low-income residential, and eventually reaches the Grand River, about a mile south of downtown. So some interesting facts about Plaster Creek. It's 14 miles long. It's 58 square miles of land that drain to it. And it has 9 different governmental units. So this watershed is actually pretty small, but it has a lot of different people living in it. So this makes it hard to kind of control regulation because there's so many different ideas and so many different communities in one spot, but share the same waterway. So Plaster Creek Stewards is through Calvin University. And we actually started because we were concerned with this waterway that is deemed the most polluted waterway in West Michigan. And we realized that over half of Calvin faculty and staff live in this watershed, as well as over 3,200 alumni. So we are obviously part of the problem of the issues of Plaster Creek, and we wanted to be part of the solution. So that's why Plaster Creek Stewards formed. Within the watershed, there's also 172 churches and faith communities and over 100 schools. This is a quote that I love and inspires a lot of the work that we do. This is from Wendell Berry and from his essays, Watershed and Commonwealth. It says, "People who live at the lower ends of watersheds cannot be isolationists, or not for long. Pretty soon they will notice that water flows, and that will set them to thinking about the people upstream who either do or do not send their solute and pollutants and garbage. Thinking about the people upstream ought to cause further thinking about the people downstream. Such ponderings on the facts of gravity and the fluidity of water shows us that the Golden Rule speaks to a condition of absolute interdependency and obligation. People who live on rivers might rephrase the rule in this way: do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. When we saw the map of the watershed, we could see that it flows through a lot of different communities. These communities impact each other by sending down their pollutants. The downstream communities receive disproportionately amounts of these pollutants. That's why it's important to realize that your actions on land always impact your water. So let's review some of the main issues with Plaster Creek. The first issue is the flow, meaning it gets too much water. So you can imagine the landscape before development. It was mostly woods and meadows and lots of natural vegetation and green space. So when it rained, most of that water was absorbed by plants. But now we've added lots of pavement and parking lots and roofs and taken down a lot of trees in the landscape. So now the water gushes into drains in our streets and parking lots and goes straight to the nearest waterway. So where we are now, all the water drains into Plaster Creek. So when it rains, there's this huge gush of water entering the creek, and that's triggering a lot of these issues. So with this huge gush of water comes lots of sediment. The creek is oftentimes almost like a chocolate milk color. We call that turbid. That means it's full of dirt and sediments, and when the water flows really fast because it's coming in so quickly, that water can kind of cut away at the banks and cause lots of erosion. Another issue is bacteria contamination. So this is something we can't see in the water, but from our water quality testing we know is a problem. So E. coli is a bacteria found in fecal matter, and there's very high levels of E. coli in Plaster Creek, mostly right after it rains. So from our research, we know that we have found E. coli levels up to 54,000 colonies per 100 milliliters. Just to put that in perspective, the water quality standard for full body contact, so that means water that's safe to swim in, is 130 colonies per 100 milliliters. And we found over 54,000. So this water is a huge public health hazard. Nobody should be swimming, nobody should be wading. Don't let your dogs drink from the creek. This water can be very, very toxic, especially after a rainstorm. Nutrient pollution. So this is extra fertilizers, lawn clippings, things like that getting dumped or washed into the creek. These extra fertilizers and things kind of disrupt the energy balance of the creek and can cause algae blooms and other issues. Thermal pollution. So this is something we don't always think about, but just imagine on a hot summer day, that asphalt parking lot is almost steaming hot. When it rains, all of that water absorbs that heat. And then when it goes down the drain into Plaster Creek, there's a huge gush of hot water, and that can be really stressful for aquatic life, especially fish. And trash and toxic substances. That's just areas in the watershed where people are directly dumping into the creek. So what can we do? How can we begin to restore the health to the watershed? This picture is very interesting. This is on Madison Avenue near Cottage Grove. You can see some students over there. They are popped a manhole, and what they're looking at is a tributary to Plaster Creek called Silver Creek. Silver Creek was actually put underground shortly after the Great Depression in Grand Rapids as part of kind of a public works initiative to create jobs. There was a stream that used to flow through this area, but during development, it kind of gets in the way, it meanders, it floods a little bit, so it was put into a pipe. So this creek goes underground for 4 miles until it reaches Plaster Creek by Roosevelt Park. But But if it gets you to thinking, right when we took this photo, this guy picked up his kid from the bus stop. And that just got us to thinking, how would this kid's life be different if there was a creek running through his neighborhood? If he had access to a healthy waterway to play in, to explore? We all deserve access to nature. So how can we begin to restore this watershed that has been neglected for a long, long time? So that's one of the motivating factors for Plaster Creek Stewards. We are a group from Calvin University, which involves, concerned community members, students, faculty, anyone who really cares and is interested in helping Plaster Creek. So we focus on three main things. First is education and outreach. So teaching people about the issues of Plaster Creek and what they can do about it. The third is research, because we're part of a university. We're able to do different research projects looking at bacteria, plant survivorship, hydrology, all those sorts of things. We use Plaster Creek as a laboratory for many classes. And then the third thing is restoration projects. So that's where you guys fit in with the curb cut rain gardens. So excuse me, the curb cut rain gardens are a really awesome project happening currently in the Alger Heights, Garfield Park, Oakdale, and Roosevelt neighborhoods. What we do is we take the area between the sidewalk and the lawn, which is owned by the city but maintained by the homeowner, and we add a rain garden. So this is kind of what it can transform into. What we do is we dish it out, excavate it, plant some native plants, add some rock to the inlet, and then cut the curb. So that way the water flowing down the street now goes into the rain garden instead of going down the drains into Plaster Creek. So the first step is excavating out what's currently in the parkway. So that's digging up the lawn, creating kind of a shallow depression for the water to pool in and soak into the ground. And that way it's getting filtered and cooled by the soil and the plants and enters the groundwater, which will naturally release into the creek instead of gushing in right away after a rain. So excavation is the first step. That's kind of what it looks like after the excavator is headed out. Then we add mulch on top of the soil, and sometimes the soil is amended with some compost as well. And then we add rocks, usually just towards the beginning, right where the curb is going to be cut. That way, when the water is gushing into the garden, the rocks are there to slow it down, release some of that energy so it can spread out within the rain garden. And then the garden is planted. So we have students that we hire from the neighborhoods and from Kelvin students that work during the summers with us, and they kind of coordinate the planting and do that work, as well as any volunteers or you or anyone else who wants to be involved with the planting. So currently, as of the spring of 2020, we have 75 of these gardens installed in the Alger Heights, Garfield Park, and Oakdale neighborhoods. And we're hoping to do 30 more within the next 2 years. So slowly by slowly, these gardens are becoming more popular, and we're changing the paradigm, shifting the aesthetic to what these rain gardens look like. They're not your normal lawn or traditional landscaping. They look a little different and take some getting used to, but when you understand the benefits that they have, then people have really been getting on board with this project. So here's a video showing a rain garden in action. The water flows down the street and then through the cut in the curb and then into the rain garden. And thankfully the Alger Heights and Garfield Park and Oakdale neighborhoods have fairly sandy soils, so these gardens absorb a lot of rainwater. But in order for these rain gardens to function properly, there is some maintenance involved. So that's what we want to get at today. So you can learn how to maintain the rain garden that you will be you will be getting. So why maintenance? Maintenance is important to help your plants become established so they can grow and become full quickly. That way less weeds will grow, and you kind of get the good establishment so it'll be less maintenance long term. And you want to keep these gardens efficient at treating the stormwater or the runoff rainwater coming off the street. And when we maintain things, they just look nicer, and that's important, especially in a community neighborhood. So what can you do for maintenance? There's a couple of things that we're going to go over today. Controlling the weeds that can come up, pruning or thinning some of the plants, replanting if there's areas where the plants die, watering, and then removing sediment and debris as they occur. So the plants that we use in the rain gardens are native to Michigan. So they're used to Michigan weathers, the hot summers and cold winters, and they survive year after year because of their deep root systems. So these root systems can be up to 12 feet deep. They absorb a lot of water and kind of create little channels for the water to percolate into the ground. On this graph here, this dot, or I should say this circle right here, shows the depth of lawn grass. Lawn grass has very shallow roots and is not good at absorbing water. So by replacing it with these native plants, we're able to absorb a lot more water. And because they're native to Michigan, these plants are naturally recognized by the birds and the bees and butterflies and pollinators and different creatures that live in Michigan. So they kind of create this habitat, this biodiversity hotspot in our urban neighborhoods. And these plants, because they're used to Michigan conditions, don't need the fertilizers or the herbicides or the pesticides to maintain themselves. Another role is we think they're beautiful. Here's some picture of some native plants planted out in different projects and one of our green team students helping pull weeds. So controlling weeds. Some questions to ask yourself. When you're looking at your rain garden, you're wondering, is this a weed, is this not? We'll be giving everybody a map of their garden. So you can check your map to see what plant is supposed to be there. Does it look like a native plant near it, or is it just kind of a loner? That might be an indicator that you have a weed. Another thing is learn what your plants look like. So keeping a garden journal can be helpful. Is this plant on a clump or is it on its own? That can be an indicator if it's some random thing or if it's something that's growing and becoming more and more established. Can you find this plant in your lawn or in other gardens, like a dandelion or something that can just spread around and you're like, oh, well, it's over here, it's over there, it's not intentional. Also, we have a Facebook group called Rain Garden Maintenance. And you can feel free to join this group and you can post photos of plants and be like, is this a weed or is this a good plant? And I will answer you. A caveat, native plants do spread. Their seeds will move around a little bit. So these are your gardens and you're welcome to pull up native plants if you feel like they're getting too weedy or move things around. It's your garden, your aesthetic, so it's up to you. Here is an example of what a map would look like that we would give you of your rain garden. So this right here is where the curb cut would be, the basin, that's where the rock is, and then the different patches of native plants. We like to plant them in big clumps. That way it's easier to tell what's supposed to be there instead of just kind of sporadically planting them. So you'd be like, okay, this patch is all black-eyed Susan, or this patch is all purple coneflower. So it's easy to tell what should be where. So now we're going to do a little bit of vocab. So this is an example of an invasive plant, something that's taken over, spreads. This is Shasta daisy, which is not native to Michigan, but can totally take over. This is a picture of a prairie up in Newaygo where I was doing some restoration. And I had to pull all the seed heads off these flowers so their seeds couldn't spread anymore. So this is an example of an invasive plant, non-native invasive. This is an example of a non-native plant that's not invasive necessarily. So this is a Norway maple, or another non-native would be like a tulip, something that you plant once and it just kind of stays there and doesn't spread. So a non-native plant isn't necessarily invasive. But there are some invasive plants that we want to be aware of in your rain gardens. These are just a couple. You don't have to memorize these. You'll probably get a feel for it as you're working in your rain gardens. What is what, and never be afraid to, email Plaster Creek Stewards or go on our Facebook page to ask questions, because we're definitely here as a resource for you all and want to help you maintain these gardens. So garlic mustard, clover you might have found in your yard before, Canada goldenrod, those are just some of the weeds that are common in Michigan. When weeding your gardens, you want to think about pulling up the whole root of the plant. So roots can come in different sizes and shapes. Sometimes they're fibrous, like in this picture here, it's just kind of a big wad of roots. So you want to kind of take a shovel and pull that up. A lot of times it's easier to weed a garden once you've watered it, so the soil is a little bit moist. So fibrous root system is one type. A taproot, almost like a carrot, that's another type of root. You want to make sure you pull up the whole thing. That's another kind. Or rhizome, which is when it makes a little clump and then spreads underground and makes another clump. This is how lawn grass and most invasive grasses spread. So the main thing is when you're weeding is you want to get the whole root so that plant can't grow back and cause more work for you in the end. All right, so limiting the spread of weeds. There are different ways that plants spread their seeds. These pictures below, you can see dandelion spreads in the wind, or the helicopters on the maple trees, they spread in the wind, or the burrs on that sock right there, they spread sticking to you. So you want to think about not spreading the weed seeds, especially when you're pulling up the weeds. So it's good to weed your garden in the spring, mid-May, before things are getting really tall and unruly or going to seed, which means they've developed their seeds and are about to drop them. So weeding is important to keep up on, but I'll say probably weeding the first year or two is the most, and then it's a lot less weeding once the plants fill out. So you can put these weeds in your compost if they're not dropping their seeds yet. Otherwise, you might want to just throw them in the trash. Some other ways of controlling the weeds are different tools. So mulch is actually something we use a lot to control weeds. So when we plant your garden, we use a lot of mulch because that keeps down the weed seeds. You can use a hand rake shown in this picture here to kind of loosen up the soil and make sure you're pulling all the roots out, or just to kind of wipe out some of the teeny seedling weeds to get rid of those. Another option is herbicide, though I would be cautious of that, especially in a rain garden where water is going into the soil and spreading and soaking down into the ground. We don't really want to spread chemicals into the groundwater. But Roundup is okay to use if it's a very dry day, you're not going to get any rain for the next couple days. Just spray a little bit where needed. And don't do it on a windy day because then it can, we call that drift, when the herbicide can kind of blow around and burn other plants. So I would say use caution when using Roundup. Usually if you can keep on your weeding, just plucking a few weeds here and there, once a month or so, well, you'll stay on task with that. Pruning and thinning. This is kind of optional if you want to keep things looking more tidy. You can cut different areas of your plants to make them look more tidy. You want to kind of cut in the joints of the plants as shown in this picture here, cutting right near what would be like the base or the trunk. You can move plants around in your garden. If one area is a little more thin and you want to add more plants. In removing the dead plant material, you can chop it down. We recommend actually doing that in the spring because there is some benefits to leaving the dead plant material over winter. A lot of the native bees and insects actually burrow into the stems and hibernate there over winter. So it's helpful if you can leave the stalks up until, May or so. And then if you'd like to cut them down, you can cut them down and throw them in your compost. But it's important to, preserve the habitat for our bugs and insects that are on decline right now globally. Also, native plants are smart in the fact that their seeds will not grow unless they've gone through a winter. So if you want your plants to spread and your garden to become more full, if you leave the seed heads on over winter, then they'll drop the seeds and the seeds will grow in the spring. So that's just a note for Michigan plants. And also we think some of the plants can be pretty and add different textures in the winter. All right, replanting. If you have an area of your garden that dies out, you can contact Plaster Creek Stewards and we can hook you up with some more plants. If you want to add some non-native plants, it's your garden, so that's up to you. We ask that you just kind of let us know. We do use these rain gardens for research, and we keep track of the number of plants and stuff, so if you're moving plants around or adding new stuff, just let us know, and then we won't use that garden for research purposes. Watering. So this is most important once your garden is first installed. Keep your plants moist, especially in times where we're not getting a lot of rain. Those new plants are used to getting watered almost every day at our greenhouse. So when they're put out in the real world, it's nice to give them a little bit of water to help them adjust. And it just helps your plants look more fuller and healthier and is a nice way to keep down weeds if your native plants are growing and robust. And one thing I wanted to put in here is a rain barrel. If you want to add a rain barrel to your home, you could reach out to West Michigan Environmental Action Council. They're a group in Grand Rapids that offers rain barrel workshops to get rain barrels for your home. So this is just a barrel that goes at the end of your downspout and collects the rainwater, which is another way to reduce your runoff, actually. So it saves the rainwater in that barrel, and then you can connect a spigot to it and use that to water your garden. And I mentioned that we grow the plants at our greenhouses. In the fall, I go out and collect seeds from native areas in Michigan, and then we have those plants over winter at our greenhouse on Calvin's campus, and then with the help of students, we grow up all the plants that we use in these projects. So we kind of have a very sustainable and local loop within this work, growing all our own plants for our projects. So sediment and debris. Because we have trash and things on our roads, it's common that that'll wash right into your rain garden, and leaves, especially in the fall time. So it's important to kind of, keep that in mind. So we're cleaning out our rain gardens. Come up with a trick to this, because sediment can be a huge issue that just clogs the rocks and doesn't look nice, and can actually, clog your storm drains and flood the streets and things like that. So a solution we came up with is a sediment trap. So this is a simple design that we put in right at the front of your curb cut rain garden. So where we cut the curb, we add these paver stones here and create kind of this little box that actually catches the water, slows it down, and lets the sediment and dirt and stuff settle out, and then it overflows that into the rain garden. So here's a picture here of what your sediment trap might look like. It's just made with paver stones, and we intentionally leave little gaps so the water could soak through. It doesn't become like a puddle always of standing water. But it's important to take a trowel or a shovel once in a while to scoop up the dirt and leaves that wash into this area after a rainstorm. So we want the water to be able to drain through it, but we want to make sure we're maintaining it by scooping out those leaves and things regularly. Some more pictures. All right, and here are some more resources for you. Like I said, we have the Rain Garden Maintenance page on Facebook. We will give you a manual, which is just a small booklet with some guidelines about how to maintain things. You can look up photos of common weeds, benefits of native plants, different root types and things, or you feel free to email us at plastercreekstewards@calvin.edu. And look at our website for more information. We're very excited that you're interested in being considered for a curb cut rain garden in your neighborhood. We know if we're able to put in many rain gardens within these neighborhoods, we can catch all the extra runoff that is getting to the creek because of development. And if we're catching all that extra runoff, then there's a lot less flooding and pollutants that are able to reach Plaster Creek. So thank you for your role in keeping your watershed beautiful and also adding biodiversity to your neighborhoods. Thank you.